Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February 28th, 2024 Sig-Auth meeting. Let's kick it off. Here we have the agenda. Ahmed, do you want to go? Are you on the call? No, he's not on the call. We can go
He
to
commented on the agenda and said he couldn't make it, so we could punt it to next time.
Sorry?
He commented on the agenda and said he couldn't make it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, punting then.
I'll move that up to next time.
All right, we can move to the next item. Do we have Stealthy Box on the call? I don't think so.
I'm not sure if this was a thing they were planning to do or ask for. I'm not sure if they were from the docs team. Oh, that's Lee. Got it. Structured auth C. Yeah, so Lee had asked in Slack if we would like help putting a
I think
blurb
this was
together.
from the last meeting.
Yeah.
I already pinged him to ask if how he
Okay.
wants.
I'll link to the Slack thread and the placeholders, and I guess we can move on.
Sounds good. The next item, Lynn, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. My name is Eric Lin. I currently working this pull request, which I want to make a change on Kube API server, where we have this list of admission plugin, which would pull a list of Kubernetes objects from Kube API itself. The idea is to retrieve those Kubernetes objects directly from the storage layer instead of from the REST layer. So by doing that, we can just avoid copying those objects. Instead, we just reference them. So we can do that for better memory efficiency. But there is some risk doing that because we basically bypassing this HTTP layer and get those objects directly from the storage. But at the end, understand it, this is only for read-only, and most of the logic is in the storage layer, which means there is no like complicated logic in the REST layer. So basically, we getting the same Kubernetes objects from the storage layer, and by doing that, we can have some better performance here. But before going through a lot of conversation in the API machinery, Sig, I think the big risk is about the security, like because we don't go through any like authentication in this here, because basically they get the storage directly. There's no authorization and so on. So I want to get some reviews from this Sig to see if this is possible to move forward.
So is this implementing a client that is backed by storage? Is it the client interface?
Yeah, the client interface will be very similar. Maybe they'll have some trivial change in the interfor API. Currently, we have that. And this is how admission plugins are using. They basically use the Informer API, so they have exactly the same API, but internally, it just uses the storage API rather than the HTTP API.
Okay. So the client that Cube API server has to talk to itself is hardwired to be a super user client. So when it makes read requests, those are always allowed before any other authorizer is consulted today. And read requests don't pass through admission at all. They could be audit logged. I'm just thinking of like all the things in the handler stack that the loopback client hits. So it does hit the authorization layer, but the authorization layer is hard coded today to allow this client. As part of the authorization config work we did, I think David Eads brought up the topic of taking that implicit hard-coded allow this loopback, or the hard-coded allow super users at the beginning of the chain and making that explicit in the config and letting you like move it to later points in the config. I think that's really risky actually, because it means you can possibly run into cases where this client would be disrupted. But if we moved this client to not go through the authorization chain at all, on the one hand, it would remove that risk, but it would also sort of make it even more hard-coded direct access, unable to be policied or audited or visible in any way. So from an auth perspective, the main thing that this is losing us today is audit.
I have a question about the auditor because basically most of the object pooling is via the watch API. If the object is actually audited by like the watch stream.
Yeah,
I think it's only the initialization of the watch requests are audited, but nothing after that.
But the fact that the client is making those requests shows up in the audit log. The fact that it did a list and did a watch.
The common pattern in the plugins are just watch all those objects and catch them in the local. So they never do that like on demand or on request list or something like that. So they have their own catch, and the catch is from the watch string, and that's it. So they are never audited that when there is a request hit that plugin. This is my understanding.
Well, the list and watch requests hit the plugin. The list and watch that feeds the informer shows up. And then there are plenty of admission plugins that do occasional gets under certain circumstances. So when they do read, you're right. Most of the time they just use the cached version from the informer, but sometimes they fall back to live reads, and those show up as normal requests. Today, it seems like audit is the main thing we would lose by making this not go through that layer. But any of the efforts to make the implicit super user authorizer more explicit or visible or happen later in the chain, this would, a change here to bypass that authorizer entirely, it would mean we couldn't make these things more visible. My concern is actually less about the authentication authorization concern, just because we're already giving this thing a super user client to everything. Like we're already authorizing it for everything everywhere. Like there's no subdivision today. My concern is more from the API machinery side, that this is a completely parallel, completely different path that I have a really hard time understanding how it behaves. It seems like a lot of change for exactly one client. And I can see why it would save a lot of resources, but it's really hard to understand like the bugs that could be here or could be different. I can reason about the current client that admission plugins are using, because it's exactly the same as the client everybody else is using. And the handler stack it's going through is exactly the same. And wiring it directly to etcd or directly to our cacher from etcd, I just have a really hard time reasoning about. I've talked a lot. What do other people? I don't know if anyone else
Mo
has
has his
in
hand
the
up.
PR.
Mo?
Yeah, so I think the comment I was gonna make is, I feel like years ago we used to follow this exact pattern in OpenShift where we made direct calls to etcd, and it was awful. It was very hard to maintain. And
Can you remember some of the specifics about why it was awful?
because I think we were struggling with making sure that the data we read from etcd in that way matched exactly the semantics of how we would have read it from the REST API. I think
Okay.
back then also OpenShift had more complex patches that were trying to tweak more things, so it was just easier for it to drift. So I don't think the exact mechanisms or the exact severity will resurface here, because I think we're more stabilized on a lot of the low-level interfaces. But it gives me the same exact kind of nervousness of like today it might be benign, but it's not guaranteed to stay that way, right? Like I don't know how you write a test that asserts that this thing never drifts in any semantic or meaningful way from what you would have gotten from a regular REST call.
From yeah. So from what I can see here, like the most logic is in our storage layer, and nothing changed after that storage layer, which is a REST layer. Like everything get out from the storage layer, it go to the REST layer, and REST layer doesn't modify that object afterwards. So I think this is safe, but this is not it probably subject to the future change, and then REST layer would change anything. But from what I can see about the code structure, everything from the storage layer is exactly the same from the REST layer. So that's why I think like this is feasible from the current structure. But yeah,
Right, but I don't think it's feasible from the perspective of forever into the future. Right, that's like it's not guaranteed. Like I don't think you can write a test that asserts that it never drifts.
I'm trying to remember if there were things if there were hooks in the REST storage layer that implementations could decorate.
Yes, there is, if I understand what you mean, like there is a decoration in the storage layer.
Yeah.
So when you get an object, it will go through that decoration first, and then return it to the caller.
Is that in storage or
Yeah,
is that in REST?
in the storage.
There's also a decorator in the REST layer. I don't know if we used this. Ah, we do. I just found one. Yeah, let me point at an example of decoration that happens at the storage layer that going directly to etcd would miss. I'll put it in the agenda. So there's this decorator hook.
This decorator is on the storage, right? It assigned to the storage. So when storage return that thing, it will respect this decorator from the rest.
This is the storage that you would be talking directly to.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. The objects that get returned from storage, are they shared objects or are they safe for the thing we return them to mutate or do whatever it wants to?
I think they are read-only. This is suggested by the Informer API. So anything in the Informer API, like you should not modify that. And I don't think the plugin is modifying in any object. So yes, if they modify something, it would be a risk to change this object in the storage. But I think we can guarantee that somehow in like a tracker or verifier or something.
Having it go through a client layer where the storage returns it and then it marshals and unmarshals, like that makes it impossible for the client on the receiving end to mess with the objects that the storage had. Like you're basically going through the wire. So the wire serialization, deserialization keeps.
Yeah, that's a copy because
It's like
basically
a hard firewall between the two.
Yeah.
And you're right. Once it gets into the Informer, if you've got lots of clients messing with stuff in the same Informer cache, they shouldn't be modifying it. If they do modify it, the worst they're going to do is interfere with another client that's looking at the same Informer cache. If we wire those things directly to storage and don't make copies of what storage returns, then the worst case, I'm not sure what the worst case becomes if they mess with an object. Maybe they modify an object that is also getting used to serialize out to API clients. Maybe, I'm not sure.
I think it will, because basically they are reference to the same object. Yeah.
Yeah,
they will.
I really don't like that. Like,
Yeah, but we can. So actually, because the plugin is in the same code base as the API server, so what we actually can do is add a linter check over this thing. But this is a kind of mitigation or workaround for this.
I don't think that's technically possible, because
yeah, we've tried to do that. Even detecting the changes in the Informer cache, like detecting that things that we're using shared objects in an Informer cache, we have a checker, but it's kind of just best effort, and it's actually really hard to guarantee that. So I think Eric is looking at, Rita asked what problem is Eric trying to solve? It's resource usage of Kube API server.
Yeah,
The fact that
basically,
Kube API
Yeah.
server is reading stuff from etcd, caching it, and then a different loop inside Kube API server is like, hey, I need objects from etcd, and so it's making a loop back client call to itself and getting a second copy of those same objects in an informer cache. So it's reading from etcd, unmarshalling into its storage cache, and then it's requesting objects from itself, marshalling those, unmarshalling them, and storing those in an informer cache. That's the inefficiency that Eric's trying to eliminate.
yes.
But it is one that we have and have always had, basically, right? And stuff isn't exploding. Like, yes, there is limits to the scale you can run Cube stuff at. I don't think this is the one that's the limiting factor. And the bugs that might come out of this seem like a different kind of trade-off that I don't think we're willing to make.
Yeah, the shared object aspect is way more concerning to me than not making our super user loopback client go through the authorization filter. Like, completely separate, parallel, not hardened code paths that are only for this path, that get handles to shared objects that we can't really verify nothing is changing. Those are the things that make me not want to do this at all.
But if like any plugin is modifying about object, it's already a risk for all those admission plugins because they are sharing those objects after all, right? So this is already a risk.
It is a risk. We have best effort detection of that, and the risk is lower than modifying those in a way that would get returned to all API clients. Yeah, so that's my feedback. I am less concerned about skipping the authorization filter in particular. I am very concerned about completely separate client construction and logic and code paths that only this spot would use. So we wouldn't get the benefit of broad usage to help us catch any issues with it. And shared objects, the blast radius for those, I think, is pretty bad. So that's my feedback. If anyone else wants to summarize their feedback, anyway, if you're looking for Sig-Auth's perspective on it, I think that's mine, at least. It sounded like Mo had similar reservations.
Okay, to just recap the risk and concerns. So I guess the biggest concern is the modification of those shared objects. So if we can find any feasible way to detect that, it still have a chance to make a progress on this thing. Do you agree?
I think the risk of modification of shared objects is high. The risk of a completely separate code path that is only for this caller is also high.
but it's hard to quantify this risk because for me, like any change would bring in certain level of risk, and how to mitigate that risk is like not clear to me. Like how should I mitigate this concern?
I mean, I think what we're saying is the way we have approached mitigating these types of risks is to funnel things through one code path, right? And then really, really test that path in every way possible. So that way, if we have a bug, it exists in one place and we fix it, not exist in two places. Because this special code path would basically have no coverage because no one but one client touches it in a very special way.
It seems like to mitigate the risk, you would need rigorous correctness tests of client behaviors and make sure that this client behaved identically to the existing standard client. And I don't think we have that level of testing in place or anything close to it. And so it's hard for me to think about specific gaps that like correctness testing gaps. Like it, for this to be safe, the clients would have to behave identically, and the stated goal of these clients is for them to not behave identically. Like today, you make a client request and you get back an object that is safe for you to do stuff with. And the goal of this is to make a client request and get back a shared object that is not safe for you to do stuff with. And so, like, yeah, I just have a hard time reasoning about the things at all the layers that changes, all the way down the informer stack.
I guess I would ask one question. Is there any work in the Go language to support immutability?
I don't think so.
Like, but I think that's what we're missing here, right? Like, if this was Rust, this would be trivial. Like, you could guarantee your constructs because you would require that you can't mutate, right? All the concerns that we have, we would sort of forcibly encode into the compiler, and we could keep tightening and ratcheting until we got to a place where we felt really comfortable. But like, I don't think a linter is going to do it, right? Like, if you do the wrong thing, it just needs to not compile. But I don't think we have the way to express that.
I saw the link. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Like, is that possible? Like, just use some kind of link track to track assignments in those code to see if this is like a modification or something. I don't have enough knowledge on this thing, but I feel like track some kind of assignments could be helpful for this.
So I am unaware of like any like Go linter that can guarantee that like an arbitrary object, which itself might have like mutating methods and stuff, is never used in a way that mutates it. Right? Like we have had bugs in the past where the API server panics because it does a runtime mutation of a map. And that map mutation happened like 7 layers indirectly inside of like an admission plugin. And we only caught it because it caused someone's API server to crash, basically in a special sort of way. Because it hit the Go runtime check saying, no, thou shalt not mutate maps in parallel, and I will break your failing program for you. Right? But like, we would have never found that with all of our linters in place. It's just because the Go runtime got real mad and killed the program, and thus we got a bug report. Yeah, I don't know if we have the right tools to enforce the guarantees we want to enforce here.
All right. Does anyone have any other areas to raise on this that we haven't kind of talked about already? If not, we could probably move on to the next topic. All right.
Hey folks, so that would be me. Hi, I'm Anusha. I'm from the policy working group. Along with me, I have Jim and Gus as well on call. So this is about promoting policy report API as a Kubernetes SIG API. We did present in this meeting like a few months ago or several months ago when because working group is temporary, and this API was developed by the policy working group. We were looking for a permanent home for this project, and it was suggested to us that why not move it as a Kubernetes SIG project. And to do that, it turns out we need a sponsoring SIG as well. And one of the suggestions we received from this group was to open a KEP so that it'll be easier for everybody to collaborate and review. So we went ahead and created the KEP. So we are seeking some advice on, how to move this forward, what the review process is going to be like.
I'm just linking to the last time we talked about it.
Awesome, thanks.
Looks like there was like a slide presentation. Cool. Just drop those in so people can chase those. And did you say that there was a KEP open already?
Yeah, I've linked it in that line. KEP 4447. Yeah.
Can't see. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just paging back in.
Yeah, I think I can give an overview as well. So
Yeah.
This was created so that, policy producers like projects like, Kiver know there's JS policy and others who are like policy engines who want to create some sort of a policy result. And then there are several consumers of this API or this policy engines where, they want a standard format so that, they can build their tools on top of it. That is where the policy working group came up with this API. And we have several users now, both in terms of producers and consumers. And hence, yeah, we want to move this out of the prototype of policy working group and make it as a project.
Yes, the one concern we had discussed last time around, and we do have some updates on that too, was, like events, policy reports tend to, can be a lot, right? And it does put some strain on etcd, and there were questions on whether it's the best use of the limited storage available. So I think there's two projects now which have taken different approaches. There is a API aggregation layer, which is about to be released in Kyverno 112 as a sub-project. So although it's under Kyverno, it can be reused by anything, which wants to offload etcd for these policy reports. And also there's the Open Compliance project has a similar type of initiative for long-term storage, but that's more for history, which builds on top of etcd. And maybe Gus, if you want to say anything else about that one.
Sure, it's the Open Cluster Management CNCF project, and we have a long-term storage proposal and partial implementation for storing the policy details and the compliance data produced. That information I could link in somewhere.
Yes, although those again, both of those are not necessarily required to just publish the API objects, because all we want to promote here is the API object spec and some guidelines on usage. We thought it's important to have these at least available. And again, before we have more, so there's already fairly wide adoption of this reporting API, but as it expands, we want to make sure that there's proper guidance on when it would make sense to start offloading etcd.
It looks like the API group is WG policy K8s.io. Would you be wanting to keep that API group or move it under like X8s.io? Have you thought about?
The
Yeah.
latter, I think we just use the work group as a temporary placeholder right now. But
Okay.
again, the idea is at some point the work group will likely wind down, right? So we'd like something more permanent.
Okay. Yeah. So changing the API group is a reasonable thing to do. It means that existing users of the API have to migrate to the new API group. So just describing if that's the goal and calling that out as like, we have existing users, but we want to change the API group. So those existing users is like a balancing act. Like
Right.
we've proven people are interested, so we have users, and now we want to get to the final home. And the more interest we have and use we have today, the more people have to migrate. So that's one question, just something to describe what you're sort of hoping to target it as. If it lived under like a Kubernetes SIGs group, I think it being an X8s.io API would make sense. Do we actually control the domain name that it's on? I'm just curious. Like the WG policy K8s.io. I'm that seems not real, but
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a real domain now. Or
okay.
yeah.
Then yeah, we would definitely want to change that. So the API groups are intended to match like control of domain. So so that's one point. The other is just like plan for getting to stable. Like in general, we don't like people to stick on unstable things for a long time, and so it doesn't have to be stable like to get into Kubernetes SIGs. Obviously, we do things in alpha and beta and whatever there, but just a summary of like, when did it go to beta? Is there a clear picture of what needs to happen to get it to stable? Is there a plan to get it to stable? I think if we pulled it in, we would want some sort of plan or time frame or idea on how to get there.
So would the preference be to go to stable first and then migrate, or migrate first and then go to stable?
I think it depends. Like if it's been in V1 beta for a while and you have evidence that people are using it successfully and like it kind of does what people need it to do, then I think you can make the case for saying like, we've gotten the evidence we need, we can start it at V1. If it's only been in beta for a little while and you are just kind of wanting to bring it into the Kubernetes SIGs fold, then maybe just change the group and sort of let it soak in beta for a little longer. I'm not familiar enough with it to sort of know which of those paths you're on. But just outline sort of the history of it. Where is it at? What are you wanting? What changes are you wanting to make? And what's the plan for getting it to stable?
Right.
I will say just CRDs are so much easier to deploy if you don't have to manage active components for them. So if you're pretty happy with your beta schema, then, and you're not planning to make incompatible changes to it, I think you're going to have a hard time turning it down or making incompatible changes if it means you're going to have to run like webhook converters and stuff like that. So at that point, you're kind of better off just saying, yeah, this is stable. We're only going to make forward compatible changes like field additions and things like that. So
Right. Okay. Yeah, we'll do a quick pulse check with the major consumers and producers, and like again, this has been out for maybe at least a couple of years, if not more, and we haven't seen
in beta,
in alpha, and then
Okay.
promoted to beta. I
Beta
think
about a year, I guess, or 10 months around, I guess. Yeah.
okay, yeah, that's a good data point.
All right.
So I don't have any objections to a Kubernetes SIGs API. Mo, are you still on? What do you? I don't know if you were familiar with this. Your thoughts?
I haven't kept up strongly with it, so I'm not against it in any way. I guess. Remind me, did we say it was going to be KHIO group or XKHIO?
XKs.
Okay.
It's Kubernetes SIGs.
So that means no formal API review, right? Required.
Yeah, it can be advisory. Like we're happy to take a look at it as we have. So it's X-KHIO, which we actually do own the domain name for.
Okay.
I'll update it in the yep.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we should look at the tech and make sure we're comfortable with what's in there. I don't suspect any of us is going to have any particular concerns. I think the biggest concerns in the past have been around like etcd load, just because of size of objects. And I guess if you can just use a custom etcd instance for this stuff, it'll probably be fine. Yeah, so I think it's fine. Like, if like David was here, I'd ask him if he looked at it and stuff, just to kind of like, I don't know any of the leads has actively used this project, so like there's no like necessarily firsthand experience from any of us. So I think, like, again, that I don't think that needs to be a gating factor, because there's no way we can release the project ourselves, because that would be silly. So, but I think you guys have been working on this long enough, and the community has given you enough feedback over the years, so that like, this was like a couple of months old, I think we'd have much more concerns then.
Yeah.
You've been playing with it for a long time.
If there are sort of outstanding fundamental questions, like the ever increasing object count in etcd, it's like, all right, clearly this isn't sustainable to use this way. Eventually, no matter how big an etcd or storage solution you have, it's going to fall over. Like even just a sketch of like, here's the thing, here's the options. You can garbage collect after a certain time. You can do sparse things, so you don't take the cross product of every pod and every namespace. It's only the ones that have issues. You can offload this way with this aggregated approach. Like just sort of demonstrating that there are solutions, and here some of them are, instead of like, here's a thing that's cool and just ignore the elephant in the room. Like if you use it, it eventually will break your cluster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so there's several options, including using this report more as a log versus a complete status, limiting to just violations like you mentioned, and of course using a completely different storage backend, right? So, okay.
Yeah.
So what's the best, so with this cap, I think we're looking for the repo. Should we also work on the docs and other things as part of this cap, or do it incrementally, or what? How have other projects migrated in this manner?
I think maybe learning from what we did with the secret store CSI driver, just I think it might make sense to address all the concerns on this cap, and maybe also do an evaluation on the project itself. I think we went through that and then address all the comments and issues there before it can be moved over. I think would be good.
Okay. All right, yeah, we can definitely do that and add, but then like, let's say if we wanted to add some documentation, more guidance, things like that, we can do that after migrating the initial API spec. Is that what you meant, or should we do
I
that
think
as?
specifically the load concern, because it's the elephant in the room, it might be good to just address it in the
Okay.
CAP first. Yeah, any documentation that you write here, I'm sure you can,
Yes.
duplicate it in the project itself, right? I think it's just good to kind of make sure that's addressed in
Okay.
this CAP before we continue.
All right. Yeah, we could do that.
In terms of like life cycle, because this is all external to Kubernetes and isn't tied to a release, like when this thing merges isn't really relevant to a
Right.
particular Kubernetes release. So like normal enhancements free is code free is like, I don't think any of that is applicable to this. So some of the things in the KEP really, really want you to couple yourself to a Kubernetes release, and it's going to be like, I don't know, NA, whatever the current release is. So as a vehicle for like putting a lot of details and like focusing reviews, I think the KEP thing is great as a mechanism. Like but it's very tailored to get into a Kubernetes release, and that's just not applicable for this. So
Right.
I would definitely recommend you to take a look at the Secure Store CSI KEP because it went through the exact same process. So
you want to drop a link in?
Yeah, I'll do that.
great.
But also I just want to make sure because we did have to change the API to Xcates before the move. So we should definitely, I mean, that is still a blocker, right? To move the repo.
Yeah, I think we'd want to see the shape that you'd want to bring in.
Okay.
And like I said, like getting to V1 isn't a requirement for bringing it in, but we want to have a view to the plan for that.
Makes sense. All right. No, we can make those updates first and update the KEP. Sounds good.
Cool.
One thing I wanted to quickly mention though is like just looking in the future when this stuff is sort of in the right place, if you decide to like dramatically change the project and make it do something completely different or just dramatically change its APIs, that would be a good time that before you make those changes, you come back here and we chat about it, just so that way, we're not necessarily like policing you guys, right? We're not going to be watching everything you change. So we are trusting in you that you will come to us if you feel like you are doing something that's really dramatically different than whatever was sort of initially approved.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, yeah, we definitely hear from users and others as well if we did make some substantial change, but understood. We will, of course, keep everyone in the loop.
Yeah. One thing that some people play fast and loose with, not people inside the project tend to be pretty good, but like CRDs, or you can call a version whatever you want. Like you can call it V1, you can call it V2, you can call it V1000. Like saying it's stable doesn't make it stable. And so we see a lot of things out in the wild where they're like, oh, V1 did this and V2 did this other breaking thing. And so like as things get closer and closer to being like Kubernetes project affiliated, like we kind of try to treat stability levels coherently across them. So if we say it's beta, that means we'll make a conversion path for you to stable. And if we say it's stable, that means we're not gonna like add a new field and make it required and break your existing V1 API calls. So stuff like that. Just I don't think this is new to you. I don't think it's you're probably already operating this way, but just to say that specifically, that we try to sort of match what the Kubernetes project does with its own APIs in terms of stability levels and the types of changes we make. So.
Understood.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anusha, Gus, anything else?
Thanks.
Or
No, this was good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, I don't think I see any other item here, right? Should we conclude today?
Yes, please.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Yeah, code freeze is coming.
Let's
Thanks.
go on.
Bye-bye.
All right, see
Bye.
ya.
Thank you. Bye.